Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, but there's no actual coffee. Each episode, we interviewed an expert in the field of law enforcement analysis to share their career-defining stories and to get their insights on the world. Please join us on recognizing and learning from these brilliant minds as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 20 years of law enforcement experience, 16 of which in law enforcement analysis. He's an adjunct professor. He's a past president of the San Diego Crime and Intelligence Analysis Association and a past president of the California Crime and Intelligence Analysis Association. He's currently the senior crime and intelligence analyst assigned to the Homicide unit in the San Diego County Sheriff Department. Please welcome Jeffrey Vandersip. Jeffrey, how we doing?
Hey, very good, Jason. Thank you for having me on. Much appreciated. I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. Well, thank you for reaching out because you are one of the few people that have reached out to us and said, hey, can I be on the show? So
it felt a little weird, like, tooting my own horn. But as I told you, as we'll get in, I'm kind of excited about some stuff. So,
well, very good. No, I always tell people you should be pompous for this profession, even if it's just for a moment. So please, so you at home, if you're wondering how you get on the show, send us an email, leapodcasts@gmail.com. Jeffrey, first question I want to ask you is, I know you studied geography in school.
Yes.
So how do you go from geography to law enforcement analysis?
Well, before I even answer that question, I have to even go back a little bit further to my initial experience with law enforcement criminal justice when I worked for the Suffolk County Sheriff's Department in Boston for several years. And I worked at the Suffolk County House of Correction. Very unique phenomenon to Massachusetts or to New England. Houses of correction are sort of these places that are in between jails and state prisons. People are serving time, but they're longer than what they traditionally do in jail. And I worked really at one of those typically old Shawshank Redemption, brick and iron, 19th century prisons. And it just obviously was an amazing education with regards to that world of corrections and law enforcement, crime and rehabilitation, that kind of thing. So moving forward a bit, when I moved to California from Massachusetts, I decided to go back to school and I went to San Diego State, finished my degree in urban studies and moved right into a master's program in geography. I had always had this fascination with maps since I was a kid. I was the guy in the car who was directing mom and dad how to get places. I'd always had a fascination with the where of the world, where things happen. And then with my experience in Boston and an opportunity I had in graduate school to work for a professor who was working on a project for the Border Patrol. And they were analyzing if there was a correlation between where border crossers were coming from, and meaning coming from villages and towns in Mexico, and what routes they chose to take when they were crossing over into the United States. He tasked me with basically reviewing an amazing amount of data from the Border Patrol. And it was my first kind of exposure to connections between where things happen and who's involved with where things happen. And then that's where I kind of discovered this profession of crime analysis. I really had no clue that this profession existed until the mid-90s. And when I discovered it, I said, that's where I need to be because I can use my experience and training and mapping. I mean, I'm an old guy. I learned how to map on 3.2 on a Unix machine where it took you like all day to draw the polygon in red instead of green. I did that, and then, it kind of has gone from there.
So did you find a correlation to the villages and the pattern?
We did. As with a lot of analysis, you're confirming what is seemingly the obvious. Everybody sits around the table and goes, well, I know why that happens. And then you go and research to see if that's true. And a lot of times you confirm things that are seemingly straightforward. And that was the case then. People are coming from certain areas, certain towns, certain villages. They have connections with people who are coordinating, coyotes who are coordinating the crossing. They tend to come from the same place and they tend to use the same routes over and over. So we did see a big connection between where people were coming from and how they were getting to the other side. But the biggest eye opener for me, this was also a big education, is how much time I had to spend cleaning the data. Oh my word, because most of the data coming from the Border Patrol at that time was written stuff. I mean, I never knew that there were like 1,000 different ways to spell Mexico, never mind spelling towns and villages, et cetera. So I had to spend a lot of time. And that really helped me out because, as you know, even now, even with all the technology available to us, you've got to be willing and able to go into the weeds and understand and clean your data.
And then, are you originally from San Diego?
No.
Okay.
I was born in Rhode Island. I came from a military family. My dad was a pilot in the Navy, so I grew up in the South for the most part. And then my wife at the time, who was from San Diego, that's how I made it out here.
Oh, okay. That's a solid move
Yes.
going from Boston to San
Oh,
Diego.
my word.
At least weather-wise, right?
Oh, I know. But, I still think of myself as an East Coast guy, even though I've been here 25 years. But my heart's still in the East Coast, and my family's still there too.
I got you. Probably similar with me. I am a PA boy, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But I don't have the winter skin anymore. It's gone.
No,
I get cold very easily now.
I am such a weather wuss. I mean, you know what? If the kind of weather in San Diego that I'm now putting jackets and sweaters on, I'd be running around in Boston in a thong if it was that.
Well, I was about to say me too, but I was maybe not about the thong.
Okay. But seriously, so I guess you adjust to where you're at.
All right. So when you first start at San Diego, what are some tasks that you're getting into?
Okay, so when I first started, we're talking about the mid to late 90s. We joke, those of us who are still around, about how at that point, different units and different stations would make requests of the crime analysts. At that time, there were only 5 or 6 analysts in the entire department. And this is a department that covers like 1 million people. San Diego County, if you look on the map, is a huge county, and a huge expanse of it is our territory. We have a lot of contract cities. So requests would come in and, it would say, well, it'll take us 3 weeks to churn it through the grinder and then spit out a report to tell you what happened 3 weeks ago. So a lot of the work that I did when I started, it was a lot of counting stuff. How many of this? How many of that? Using Access, using Excel, using maps. We had an Esri account or ArcMap account. But outside of that, it was spending a lot of time creating rows and columns. We didn't have a lot of direct access to data. So you had to get data services to help you. And then you have to take that and put it into something that would work for you and for your customers.
So it's interesting that it almost seems like a rite of passage with many of us analysts that we get some reporting type tasks and we work on it for a little bit manually, but then we want to automate it. The whole idea of data management and automation becomes about because we want to not be doing this manual labor every week. We want to automate it so we can go do other things.
Well, absolutely. And not only just, the automation so we can spend more time analyzing whatever we're looking at, but also we realized that we weren't providing a whole lot of useful material to the customers. If they want to know what's going on and we say, it's going to take us 3 weeks to put this together. Well, phenomenons change rapidly. Whatever problem we were asked to help address, well, that problem has morphed into something else by the time we got around to giving them what we thought they wanted.
You mentioned there were 6 analysts when you started. Now, how many do you have?
Oh, my word. So we have over 30. 30 analysts. We have a manager. We have 2 assistant managers. So it's a bureaucracy now. It's so different from the unit that I came into.
Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think a lot of guests that I've had on the show are either from smaller departments where they're just the only analyst, or they might come from a small group where there's 2 or 3 of them. We haven't talked too much about folks from these bigger jurisdictions and some of the issues that you have because you're so big.
Right. Okay. And I've only ever worked for large agencies. Not that I've worked for a lot. I've worked in Boston and here. So at the opposite, I don't have any experience working for agencies where you're the only one. And we have agencies in our county. I have colleagues who are the only analysts in their agency. And it's a very different experience. So when I came into the sheriff's department, there were 6 or 7 of us. Even then, it was decentralized. So we have a lot of stations around the county. We have stations in Vista, San Marcos, down south in Imperial Beach, all across the county. So they were just decentralized. The analysts are embedded in those stations. I trained at headquarters until I myself was released to the hounds and went to Imperial Beach, which is it's the most southwesterly city of the United States. Small community, butts up right against the US-Mexico border. I was their first dedicated analyst. So okay. I'm new. I'm still learning my craft. Heck, 20 years later, I'm still learning my craft. Yeah, but they were like, well, we're not quite sure what to do with you. They were like, do you print out banners? do you fix my computer? So there was a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of growth. And I grew in that job because it was a small station. And I learned not only kind of standard stuff that we were to produce, the counting stuff. But I started getting into, where are things happening and how is that related to when things are happening and who is doing that at that time and place. So that was then. Over time, the department really bought into what analysts could provide. And I give a ton of credit to the department and the leaders of the department who over the years have just totally been willing to create new positions and throw resources our way. And so over time, we've grown now to where we have analysts in all the stations. We have layers of bureaucracy. We have senior analysts and assistant managers, investigative units like where I work that never had analysts in the early days, now have analysts. It's exciting, but there are challenges to that. One of the big challenges is in our department. I think it is like this in a lot of large departments, especially that serve a wide area, is we're almost completely decentralized. I work with another analyst. I see her, my colleague and I, we see each other every day, but there are other analysts that I don't ever see unless there's an all hands meeting. And I always struggled with that sort of growing into this job, that I miss sort of that everybody in a cubicle, hang your head over to somebody else's going, hey, do you know how to do this? Or have you thought about this? That problem solving that comes only with sort of intimate human contact. And I think that's the struggle that a lot of departments go, with decentralization. For a time, we came across this interesting hybrid, our department did, with Jacksonville Sheriff's Department. They had this mobile way of doing things, like you worked at a station, but 2 days a week you worked in headquarters or something like that. And that kind of hybrid we thought would be good because it would get us together. But in the end, it was just too difficult to manage and just didn't really work.
I think a lot of folks are dealing with this now, as with COVID, a lot of people are working from home. So absolutely. You've gone from, when I was in the office, I could be talking on the phone and someone overhearing something that I said and chime in, to, okay, we don't have that interaction anymore because I'm working from home. No one's listening. At least I don't think that someone's listening to my calls, right?
Right. And, there's something artificial, obviously, of having to communicate that way. It's necessary. It's how we do it. I mean, I teach a class at San Diego State. It's completely virtual. I really dislike it. I mean, I love the teaching, but doing it that way versus in person, where there's an organic element to, hey, I got a question about this right now.
So you mentioned the bureaucracy. And yes. I know that some folks I've talked to that have moved from police departments to sheriff's department. That's one theme that I hear, that the sheriff's office has way more bureaucracy than the police departments.
Yeah, that partly may be a function of sheriffs are elected. Police chiefs are appointed by, often the mayor or city council. And so we have another layer of folks that we have to consider, the voters. And so that creates things. But I think it's more the fact that we're a very large department. There's a lot of layers from the lowest departmental clerk all the way up to the sheriff. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that I'm not the greatest at honoring chains of command. I grew up in a military family, but there's a piece of me that's always kind of rebelled against that. So I want to be able to go right to the source, but that's not always possible. We got to go through channels and get things. And I get that. In an organization of 4,000 people, it would be ultimately extremely chaotic if everybody was just allowed to run around and try to figure things out on their own. But it takes time, to get answers, to get things addressed. You can't just walk into the chief's office.
Interested if this is an issue. When I had Christopher Bruce on the show, he came up on a very small jurisdiction as an analyst. And he said it was so small that not only did he read all the crimes from the day before, he was able to read all the calls for service from the day before.
Right.
So he had absolute full knowledge of most of the information that was going through the police department.
And I listened to that interview. When I was listening to that part, I thought, man, that would be something to be able to do all that. And not only that, if you see an issue, to be able to walk into the chief's office and go, hey, what about this?
Yeah, exactly. So being so large, because you obviously, one person can't read all the crimes. You can't even probably read all the assaults. Right. There's just so many. There's so many. How do you make sure that the documentation's there so you can link all these crimes together when you think there's a common theme?
Well, I think that's a big reason why we now have 30 analysts, because the problem used to be everybody complaining about they didn't have access. They didn't have enough data to work with. Because it was all hidden or it was just all on paper. Now we have too much data, because we record everything. And so we have, obviously in all the stations, we have one, in many cases, two analysts. And so, they're able to manage the activity at their station. There's no expectation that they have to necessarily be aware of what's happening in some other jurisdiction. But as you know, the challenge is always that crime and criminality doesn't necessarily respect borders. We often kind of stop at the landmark that says, leaving Encinitas, where there may be something just as important and related going on next door in Carlsbad. But that's a different jurisdiction. Different people are looking at that data. I think that our analysts do a great job of being able to manage their turf. We've created systems over the years that help us do that. But, where the rubber meets the road, you still need to get into that data and analyze it. Not everything is as important as everything else. And, I've noticed that some of the younger analysts struggle with, and that may just come with time and experience, struggle with determining, just what is the wheat and what's the chaff? Because the head of the station, the leadership, they've got tremendous demands in their time. They want to know what's going on, but they don't have to know about, all the bicycle citations and all that. And it's up to the analyst to figure out what's really important and what's the engine driving the activity and wherever they work.
And now, is everybody on the same RMS system?
Yes. Although I'm sure you've worked with RMS systems over the years. They're incredible behemoths. We introduced an RMS system in the mid 2000s, and we're already, I just learned within the last month that we've embarked on taking on another RMS system within the next couple of years. And I'm like, I dread that, because although I've been told that it's a much better system, much easier system, this last go around took us years really to get it to a place where we could use it, be comfortable with it, get data out of it, etc.
Yeah. You know Matt Harris, right?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Yeah. So
that's a great guy.
Matt just went through all of that. So he might be a good source for you to hit up, because
absolutely. And I'm going to make this pitch in case somebody from my department happens to listen to this recording at some point. Make sure that you have at least one analyst involved in the development of this program from the beginning.
Yes.
Because it didn't happen with the last RMS system. There was a tremendous amount of work at the very end that had to be done, because it was like, we didn't consider that in terms of, how do you get data out? What's important with these pull down menus, et cetera.
Well, let's get into your analyst badge story. And you actually have a couple of them that you want to share with us today. For those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is the career defining case or project that an analyst worked on. So Jeffrey, let's start with the bank robbery series.
So as I mentioned, after my training period was done, I went to Imperial Beach and cut my teeth down there for a year, 18 months. And then I was given the opportunity to become the analyst in Encinitas, which is a larger station. There's several contract cities involved with that. So it would have been more of a challenge, and it was more of a challenge. Again, we're early days, right? A lot of what we were learning about, we kind of learned on our own. I had by that time gotten my certificate through Steve Gottlieb's classes up at Sac State. Was constantly learning, but we're left to our own devices to kind of figure out how things work. I have no idea how I came across this. It may have been from one of Chris Bruce's lectures. It may have been from somebody else, where I learned that there's a simple formula that you could use to try to figure out the tempo of robberies. And what I mean by that is somebody somebody robs a bank or a store and gets X amount of dollars, let's say they get $1,000. Well, the assumption is they're taking that $1,000 for a reason. It was a rational decision to do that.
Mhm.
They need it for maybe a drug habit or gambling debts or whatever. And so let's say that same robber hits another place a week later and gets X amount of dollars. The theory is that you could establish their tempo and potentially their hunting grounds based on where they're hitting and how much they're taking each time and what is the lag between each robbery. So I thought, well, this is cool. And I've always been interested in statistics and have a background in that. And I thought, well, this could be just a fun exercise, but let's give it a try, because there was a bank robbery series that was unfolding. We called it, the FBI loves calling bank robberies, they get clever names for everybody. Well, this one was the Drywall Bandit series.
Okay,
he was
great.
called the Drywall Bandit because he wore one of those drywall like masks like we're all wearing now.
Okay.
But the ones that you wear when you're working with like dusty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So he would wear that, and he'd do his thing with the bank. So this is a series in our jurisdiction and in some neighboring jurisdictions. So I used this formula to figure out, well, where might he hit next? By that time, he had hit 3 or 4 banks. And I came up with an answer based on the criteria I put in. And I went to the FBI and my station, who were both investigating this series. And I said, not for nothing, but you know what? I think that perhaps his next hit will be here, and it may be at this particular time. And
how did that go in terms of explaining that to them? Because that's a sell, right? You got to go there and convince them that you put in a formula and got this answer, and now you want them to act based on this answer.
And you have to sell. And there are 2 things I did. If you're not feeling confident, you got to fake confident. And then you just say, but it's based on this. It's not me just going, this is, throwing a dart at the wall.
Yeah.
And fortunately, there was the investigator, I'll never forget, said, well, what we've done hasn't worked. He's still going out there robbing banks. So absolutely, we're willing to give this a shot. So I said, this is what I've come up with. Why don't, on this particular day, you sit on this bank? You never know. And you never know became this guy with the drywall mask walked into that bank and robbed it. Then you had 16 cops and agents waiting for him when he left.
Wow.
What is it? The adage, better be lucky than good. I got a little lucky then but you make your own luck. I mean, this was based on analyzing human behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this guy had a rather predictable ways of doing things. So we were just catching up to his predictable behaviors. And that's essentially what analysts do every day, are analyzing the past, but also trying to figure out what might happen in the future.
Yeah, the forecasting. So just out of curiosity, do you remember, we always talk about days between hits?
Yeah.
And you talked about the geography aspect of it.
Right.
And then you also talked about the money aspect of it. How much is he getting each time?
Right.
Which one, did they all play their own role?
They both played a key role together. Mm-hmm. So the tempo obviously was me establishing when he was going to rob next, based on how much his take was with previous robberies. And then the geography came in where we just do a basic analysis of where things were happening in the past, and then making a prediction based on formulas to figure out where he might hit next. With one exception, he hit the same brand bank in different communities. So
that makes it easy.
That made it easier, but it was still, this is a large bank. It's not like there was like 3 branches. He hit 2. So I guess he's going to hit the 3rd one.
Yeah.
But that made it a little bit easier. So it was, complex. And, it was a good feeling, obviously, knowing that you had a small piece in solving this. But it really showed me the potential power of crime analysis and how it can work when we do something beyond just counting things and when we take risks. Listen, there's plenty of things that I've advocated over the years that have come to nothing. But my advice to analysts would be, don't be afraid to be wrong. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. We're paid really to do that. Just like, I'm a big baseball fan, so I'm going to go know if Fritz's are out and use a baseball metaphor that, the best baseball players hit like 300. That means they're not getting on base 7 out of 10 times. not a direct correlation. Be willing to put yourself out there. Be creative with how you approach the jobs, because you just never know. You may hit a home run.
Out of curiosity, what was the FBI's reaction when this
Oh,
worked out
you know
so
what?
well?
The FBI reaction was really cool. They were incredibly appreciative, and they ended up giving me a citation for my help in that. So yeah, the experience that I had with the agents in that particular case was very good and very supportive.
Very cool.
And it worked, you know. In the end, they don't care what kind of alchemy you used. It resulted in arrest and stopping the series.
All right. Now, your other badge story deals with a cold case homicide.
Yes. So we're going to go from more towards the beginning of my career to now, as I sort of looking closer to the end of my career. Like I've told you, I've been working the last 6 years in major crimes, specifically in homicide. Fascinating work. I love it. It's a great gig. I work with some great people, and every day I leave going, you can't write this stuff. Or if you do, you're going to make $1 million on TV. And so a few years ago, myself and a few of the detectives started catching wind of agencies using genealogy to help solve some of their cold cases. Now, this is just before the infamous Golden State Killer case came to light publicly. So we were hearing through back channels that the FBI and the agencies where these rapes and homicides from decades past had occurred had employed a professional genealogist to help solve the case. And the reason why they deployed the genealogy at all was because there was suspect DNA at some of these crime scenes. That suspect DNA had obviously been uploaded into CODIS, but there had never, ever been a match with any other CODIS upload. For all these decades, nobody knew who was responsible for this. But professional genealogists have, for a number of years, have been using genealogy to help connect adopted kids with birth parents, or foundlings or orphans with birth parents. And connections were made between those people and police departments, and they were like, whoa, if we've got DNA from a suspect, but we have no clue who that suspect is, and we upload their DNA to a commercial database and match that DNA with all the other people who put in their DNA looking for relatives, maybe we'll figure out who this person is. And that's exactly what they did. And so we learned about this, and we were like, we've got a bunch of cold cases. Many of them also have DNA that we've never been able to match with anything. Talked to the lieutenant, we talked to the captain, we're like, will you let us give it a shot? And again, got a very supportive department, and they said, sure, let's try one case. So myself and my colleague Hailey McKinney, they sent us to a genetic genealogy conference. They got us a little bit of training. We talked to professional genealogists, and then we just learned ourselves, as well as the detectives, how to do genealogy, how to build family trees. So what happened was we had a young woman who had been murdered in 1984. There was suspect DNA at the scene, had been in CODIS for decades, no hits. So we decided that to be our first case. There are a couple of law enforcement friendly commercial systems that allow law enforcement, and openly, so Joe Citizen also knows that law enforcement is involved, uploaded the suspect DNA into Family Tree DNA, got some low matches. And that was so exciting. We've got this unknown person who matches with Jane Smith from Arkansas. Now, this match was very low. This initial match was probably in the third cousin realm, which I've come to learn is we've got thousands of third cousins. So I don't know. Do you know any of your third cousins?
No.
No, right. I barely know my first cousins. So third cousins are just beyond the pale. But we got so excited because it was the first time in decades that we had gotten that close to learning who this person might be. Well, then we just spent months building family trees from these initial matches. We still don't know who the suspect is, but we know who their matches are. And then we figure out who their matches' parents are, and then their grandparents and their great-grandparents. And then all of a sudden you've spent months building like a 5,000 person tree, but in that tree is your suspect. Then you identify people. You mentioned before about selling. We have to do a lot of cold calling to people who put their DNA in the system and say, hey, guess what? You're related to somebody who killed a woman 35 years ago. Well, and it's amazing. We had some people say, I do not really care to help you.
Yeah.
But 95% of the people we contacted at the end of the day were willing to assist us by providing us with a DNA sample so that we could see how close or how far their relationship was. And the more people we tested, the closer we got to learning who he was. And it became incredibly difficult because I laugh now because we spent a lot of time in history, even back to the 19th century, and we think, man, people were just as terrible to each other back then as they are now. They had affairs, they had kids out of wedlock, they dumped kids on the side of the road, and we had situations like this where it was difficult to continue a straight line of biology from parent to child. So a lot of roadblocks, a lot of what they call brick walls. In the end, we found out who the guy was because we tested a lot of people, and then we got to the suspect's half-sister. Tested her. She was an amazingly high match. And this is science. This isn't just, putting your thumb up in the wind. Close enough. And then all the pieces fell together after this. This suspect's father himself had been adopted from Texas. That was where we had spent most of our time. We knew that there was a relationship there in Texas. Well, he had been adopted. He came to California. He had this son. This son in 1984 killed this woman. And the reason why his DNA never showed up ever again is because 5 months after that murder, he was killed in a single car accident.
Oh, wow.
Not a few miles from where this poor woman was murdered. I mean, that answered, obviously, that mystery. You wouldn't believe, or perhaps you could believe, how powerful that was, that phone call, ultimately, to Teresa Selecki, that was the victim's name, her family. She had moved to California from Buffalo, but all of her family was still back in Buffalo. And she had come out to California and gotten murdered. And all these years, they had never had any answers. The parents had deceased. Even some of her siblings had since deceased. But we were able to bring some serious closure to that family. And that was a powerful moment.
Yeah. Now,
for sure.
Were you able to find out any more about what happened?
Well, we were never. So obviously now the suspect and the victim have deceased. We don't know what motivated them, although we were able to put some pieces together about his life. The suspect had a very dysfunctional life. He had a marriage that didn't work out, and there was a lot of violence in that marriage. The victim had worked at a bar where we believe he was also at. After that, it's a big mystery, but she had been raped and murdered, and he was responsible. Sometimes it's got to be just enough that you just know who did it, although it kind of gnaws at you like, well, why? What led to that? And we don't know. But since that, the other kinds of cases that we can use this for are Jane and John Doe's. We obviously have the Jane or John Doe's DNA, but we haven't been able to establish identity. And we had a Jane Doe who was killed in 2003, and we're extremely close to learning her identity.
All right. Very interesting. So just a couple of follow-up questions. In California, when you close this case and your suspect is already dead,
right?
Is it?
So what we did, this is obviously an open case for 35, 36 years. So it was closed by exception rather than closed by arrest or anything else. Closed by exception because the suspect is deceased.
Also, first thing that I'm thinking of as we're talking about this is all the legal matters. What are some of the legal matters that you have to go through to take this DNA and then start applying it to these third-party vendors?
Right. Okay. So back to the beginning, when we've identified a case that has available DNA to submit to a commercial lab, our crime lab will send it to the commercial lab. We use a company called Gene by Gene because they also operate a commercial company called Family Tree DNA. Smaller than like Ancestry and those places, but still one of those where as a citizen, you could buy a kit, you could spit in the tube, you could send your DNA there, and then you can learn who all your third cousins are in the world. But they're law enforcement friendly to the extent that it's clear in the MOUs with us and with the other people that we are allowed in very narrow circumstances to upload DNA only with murders, only with rapes, and Jane and John Doe's. Because it's clear from the people who are also have input their DNA that we do this, if we match with somebody, that's kind of above board. People know that that may be occurring. Where it gets not tricky, because we're aware of the landmines, the legal landmines here. This is so new that very few cases have gone all the way through the appeals process so that we don't know what we don't know. How is this going to be challenged in court in terms of, are we invading people's privacy? I mean, that's the most intimate of private things, right? Your DNA. But when we call individuals that we believe are related in some way to our suspect or Jane Doe whatever, we are absolutely clear with them who we are, what we're doing, and what we're looking for. Who has ownership, meaning they have ownership. We're not interested in their DNA. All we're interested in is to see how they match with our DNA. And when you spell that out to people, when you give them all the information, we'll send them old articles. Our detectives are very transparent with regards to what these citizens' roles could be in helping solve a crime. If they say no, they say no. We're not going to then do something or in the back door to get at it anyway. We will just find another person who's willing to help us. So in that case, I haven't seen anything we've done in the 2 years that we've been working these kind of cases that will potentially come back to hurt us in a trial situation or even an appeal situation. But you never know, right?
Yeah. Now, have you tried to use some of the bigger companies, Ancestry you mentioned, or 23andMe?
Yes. So now we use those companies, but those companies don't allow us to upload DNA into their systems. So we don't. But also because our DNA is often fluids or blood or whatever, whereas Ancestry only accepts spit. Well, we don't have the suspect's spit. But even if we did, we wouldn't be allowed to upload it. But what we do use Ancestry for all the time is for research purposes, because that is an amazing digital warehouse of information of really American history, going back, all the census pages, all the information about marriages and divorces and those kinds of things are available to research in Ancestry. So that's how we use that. We don't use it to make matches. We only use family tree DNA and this other nonprofit company called GEDmatch, which takes existing DNA that people have already uploaded into the various companies. It can get transferred to GEDmatch, and then so you can see if your Ancestry DNA that you have in Ancestry matches this other person who perhaps had it in 23andMe.
When you're using Ancestry, then it's you have somebody in mind and then you're running it through their databases.
Yeah. So what will happen is we often build on the work of others. So people have built an enormous amount of their own family's trees, structures. As I've said in a training recently, working with Ancestry trees is no different than like doing an I2 chart, where you just, it's link analysis, trying to put families together, but we'll build on the work of others. Jane Smith from Arkansas, she's built a tree of her family, has got 1,000 people on it. Well, maybe people in her tree are people that we know are somehow related to our suspect. So we'll build on her work in doing our own tree. As analysts, we have to be careful that we trust but verify. A lot of people aren't necessarily terribly careful in building their trees, but you make one mistake in parentage, you've completely ruined your work, because you'll think this guy is the father and you'll build the big tree off the father. It comes to find out he's not the father.
All right. Yeah. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about you as a supervisor and talk about some recommendations that you have for our audience. You're listening to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We'll be right back.
This is Steve Gottlieb saying, never let failure get to your heart and never let success go to your head. Always stay humble, because humility wears well.
Hey there, everybody. This is Albert Mesa, and I'm here to ask you a very important question. Have you ever done a sit-along with the dispatcher? If the answer is no, and you're currently an analyst, you're missing out on a huge piece of the data puzzle. Not only will you open your eyes to how data is captured, entered, and coded, you'll see how calls are prioritized and dispatched and get a true feel for CAD data. You'll get to see it in a whole new light and use it as a tool in your analysis. And who doesn't want to sit with the true first responder who probably saved a life right before they sat with you?
Welcome back. Before the break, Jeffrey was talking to us about his work helping to solve cold cases through genealogy. And Jeffrey, when you were talking about that, you can talk about unintended consequences. A friend of mine, her brother got the whole family the 23andMe for Christmas. And he has 3 daughters, and it came back that one of the daughters isn't linked to anybody else. And so it come out that the mom had stepped out on the dad. It's just one of those unintended consequences of what happened. Now, fortunately, in this story, they were all adults. The 3 daughters were all adults. If you can think of if they were in middle school or high school when this information comes out, can really be detrimental. I'm sure it still hurt, but...
Did the couple survive that news?
No, they had already been divorced by that point in time. It was just Christmas presents gone bad situations.
We have had that experience ourselves a number of times in talking to people whose assistance we're looking for. And when we get very close to identifying somebody, can you imagine, like I said, we found the suspect's half-sister, for that family to learn that their brother killed somebody?
Oh, yeah.
It was just awful news for them and very, very difficult. And we've had a couple other situations like that where we've had to tell people news because it's important to our case that I'm sure they would have rather not heard.
So let's get into you as an analyst assigned to the homicide unit. I actually was assigned to the homicide unit at Baltimore Police Department.
Okay.
When I was there for a period of time. And so I remember getting assigned cases and trying to link all cases together. Heroin's really big in Baltimore. So a lot of the homicides dealt with gangs and drugs.
Right.
And trying to decipher and link all this data together. Do you have a similar experience of what you're doing now? Or what's your role right now?
Well, first thing I thought about when you mentioned that, I said, well, I bet we have far fewer homicides than Baltimore does. So, a typical year for us now, our unit, interesting enough, and it's different everywhere, doesn't just handle homicide cases. We also investigate all officer-involved shootings, and that's true for a lot of homicide units. We investigate all in-custody deaths. We're a sheriff's department, so when an inmate dies in our custody, we do that. We investigate all baby deaths, all witness suicides, anything that on its face seems odd or different in terms of a death. We also investigate all long-term, and we characterize long-term as more than 30 days, long-term missing persons. So there's a lot of other cases beyond just sort of the homicides. A typical year for our jurisdiction, we have anywhere between 20 and 30 homicides. Usually.
Oh, yeah, then it's not even close to Baltimore.
Right.
That's the first, you're talking about the first 3 weeks in January, getting to that.
Exactly. So people who hear this and go 20 to 30, oh my word. What do you work, 2 hours a day? But like I said, there's a lot of other cases that we work. You mentioned gang cases. We don't have a lot of gang homicides. We have some. Those are the most difficult cases to work. Unless you're fortunate enough to have made an arrest very quickly, as the case sort of chills over the days, just in my experience, those are the cases that are most difficult to close out. Witnesses don't want to talk. Other gang members don't want to talk. Putting together that network of who may be responsible can often be difficult. But I'm the only analyst in homicide, and I support 16 detectives who are obviously working on a variety of things. And in addition to that, I spend a fair amount of time working these genealogy cases. My colleague, Hailey McKinney, who works child abuse, sex assault, also assists on my side of the shop. So we're kept busy. It's interesting, not knowing what it's like maybe to work as a homicide analyst in LA or Chicago or Baltimore. Maybe I'm sure that experience is completely different. I'm able to do actually a lot of very deep dives to a lot of these cases that require my assistance. I pride myself, if I'm good at anything, I'm good at being a mole that just keeps digging until I get at the answer. But that's probably a luxury that a lot of homicide analysts don't have when you're dealing with 3-4 a week.
Exactly. So then how many folks do you supervise?
I only supervise right now one person. You go back through the totality of my career, I've had at other points supervised a lot more than that. But right now, as the senior analyst, I only supervise one.
So this next section, what I want to get into is different recommendations that you have, given your experience. The first thing I want to talk about is what your advice would be to experienced analysts. I normally ask the question about people that are getting into the field or new analysts, but I actually want to stick with what your advice would be for experienced analysts.
I think my biggest advice, because it's advice I try to give myself and advice that I would give to other experienced analysts, it's human nature as you advance in your career, and there's a tendency to stay with the tried and true. Or maybe it's not even tried or true. It's just you stay with the stuff that you're comfortable with and you're familiar with. As the years go on, you have less and less ability or willingness to look at other ways of solving issues. And so my advice would be, don't ever stop learning, and don't ever stop telling yourself that there is always something else to learn. I try to be fairly humble about my own abilities because I never want to get to a place where I go, I've seen that and I can do it better, because I probably can't. And I can learn a lot from other analysts, including analysts that are just starting their careers, as much as I can learn from the most seasoned people. So always allow yourself to at least absorb something unfamiliar.
How about advice to either supervisors or folks that want to be supervisors? What advice do you have in terms of hiring, building the unit?
Well, I think certainly with hiring and building a unit, you want to somehow have an evaluation process that allows you to test if the individuals that you've marked for an interview actually have some foundational ability to do the job. And it doesn't necessarily mean giving them a task in crime analysis. They may not have any experience in crime analysis, but they should have some experience in statistics, in evaluating information, perhaps from other fields they've been in or from school. I'm also a big proponent of grooming the next generation in terms of, if you can, building a robust internship program. We haven't been able to do that yet in our department. We have had internship programs over the years, but I'm interested in building a deep connection with the local universities, because these are the people who are from our communities, people who are invested in our communities, and there are many of them that would make Crackerjack analysts, but just don't have the opportunity because, they need to go get 2 years of experience. So we're talking about perhaps having an analyst trainee position so that we can hire people who are new to the profession, but we think have the requisite or innate skills to be successful.
Yeah, thank you for that. There is a great need for internships. I really think every analyst unit in the country needs to have an internship program.
I agree. And, there's one thing that one of my former bosses, still a friend of mine, Kurt Smith, told me many years ago: always have identified the people who are going to replace you, which I think was good advice in terms of always grooming the next generation. None of us are going to be around forever, and we should never be so arrogant to hold on to things that the next wave isn't ready to take over the reins.
Yeah. Now, do you have an ideal hiring process, whether it's one in play or not, or one that's even just, okay, if you were running the show, this is how I would hire an analyst?
Well, I have been in the position to hire analysts. Some of the analysts that are in our department, I've had the opportunity to be part of their hiring. And I think the ideal one is, interview process itself is really artificial, as you know. And the danger in just taking a performance in an interview is that there are people who are amazing interviewers, may not be great employees. And we get wowed by interviews, rightfully so. People come in and they just blow us away. So it's got to be a mixture of that, but also a series of exercises, low-key exercises. We're not running a gauntlet here, but exercises that kind of evaluate how they think, not necessarily even how they do analysis, how they think. I think some of the things that the best analysts bring to the table have nothing to do with the applications they've learned. We can teach that. It has everything to do with how they approach systems and how they look sort of innately for patterns in anything. And those are the kinds of things you want to evaluate from the get-go.
Now, do you have go-to philosophical questions that you ask?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't been on a hiring panel in a while, so I probably have. I can't sort of recall.
Yeah, the reason I ask is that Sean Bair was on the show, and we actually did a hiring guide together. And I took his test with Bair Analytics, and one of the questions was, how many golf balls can you fit in a school bus? And obviously, the idea was not to look it up and Google it. It's just to defend your answer, come up with an answer, and then defend it. So
that's a great question, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. That has nothing to do with crime analysis. It has everything to do how you're solving a problem. And that's what we do, right? We solve problems.
And I was laughing when you said Crackerjack, because there's probably a percentage of audience that's not going to know what a Crackerjack is.
Okay. Again, betraying my age, Crackerjacks. You remember the Crackerjacks? I used to love getting the Crackerjack boxes. And, there was a day, maybe you remember, when the prizes were much better than they are now.
Yeah, I just remember they were just tattoos. I think every one of them I got was a temporary tattoo.
All right, so I'm older than that. I remember you used to get stuff like little cars
Yeah. So for those that don't know what we're talking about, like a box of caramel corn,
Right.
Crackerjacks.
Yes, you always get a prize inside.
But that leads me to your advice for analysts dealing with generations. So as new analysts come on, dealing with older generations or older generations dealing with the newer generation.
Absolutely. And this is something I've actually thought a lot about as I'm kind of in the twilight of my career. I don't mind saying, I'm 60 years old. And I'm like, God, I said that out loud. And I'm like, oh my word, where did it go? But I'm 60 and I am the oldest member of the unit, but there are a few other analysts who are close to where I am. But there are also analysts that are not even 30. So, we have this huge spread of experience and life experience and exposure to different things and how we grew up and how we approach work and how we approach how we do work. And you're certainly generalizing things, but I'm the last part of the baby boomer generation, the very end of that. And then, but since then, there's been a bunch of others. There's the Gen Xers. There's help me out, Jason. What are the other generations?
There's Generation Y. We'd have to probably Google it.
I'm
millennials.
Millennials. Yes. Yeah. Millennials. So I'm betraying my own age. I can't remember anything anymore. So I've done some research in just how each of those generations generally approach communication, how they approach relationships with their elders, with people who are younger than them, and we all do it differently. I found myself, and I think this may be typical of older workers where they start getting frustrated about the behaviors and the things of the younger pups. And then I thought, well, this is not going to change simply because I'm irritated. So I did some research for no other reason, just to kind of learn about, for instance, I like personal communication. I'll pick up a phone. I like to talk to you about things. But other generations are much more comfortable with phones and much prefer to text or to throw an email. Even the style of communication could be off-putting or embraced depending on what generation you grew up in. The challenge for all of us, and I imagine it's a challenge for younger generations in their relationships with people like myself who are just, probably irritating.
Yeah. No, that's funny because Mindy Yoon, she helps me with the podcast. She's a writer for the show. She's very much millennial.
Okay.
And so I refer to her as Millennial Mindy, and she's got to defend any time that I'm super annoyed with the millennials.
Exactly.
And of course, she calls me old man elder because I define everybody older than a millennial.
Right.
When you talk about communication, I get to the point where I am only going to text so many words. So if I have to answer you back and it's going to take more than 10 words, I'm probably going to call you.
Right.
Which to some people, that's a big no-no. If I text you and you call me back, that is big no-no. You don't do that.
Exactly.
And so she's gotten used to me saying, okay, I'm just calling you because I don't feel like texting this many words.
Well, I've learned a lot because I've got 3 kids now, all in their 20s. So they teach me a lot about how to navigate that millennial world. And that's helpful.
And another thing, actually, something funny happened this week around this same topic. So I'm on the East Coast. Mindy works in Colorado, which is mountain time. So she's 2 hours behind me. So it was probably about 8:30 here. I needed to talk to her. So I texted her, "You up?" ? I didn't realize this until she called me later and said, "Just to let you know, when you say you up, that's like a hookup line." That's like Netflix and chill kind of thing. Now I knew it was you, and it came at like 7:00 in the morning. But if it would have been 2 a.m., I would have been like, WTF.
My word. That is right. Exactly. So, we do our best. I get knocked down by my kids all the time because what did you just say? The worst thing I can do is try to be cool to the younger ones because, I'm not cool.
Yeah, I never was either. I was never cool in school or now, never.
Right. But on a third note, though, it is because we're all about personal relationships ultimately. I mean, we work processes, programs, policy, all that, but in the end, we're people. When there's miscommunication, simply because of style and these kinds of things, it's important to kind of understand them and get to a better place from there.
Yeah, exactly. Another topic I'm interested in talking about is BOLOs or bulletins. And, are they still needed, or the importance of writing in this profession?
Oh, all right. So those are two big topics. And BOLOs, I've heard this before on the program from others. I'm not sure who it was, but somebody else mentioned BOLOs being an irritant and how they're sent out. So we're inundated with emails every day. And many of those emails are BOLOs. I work in a large county with a lot of different agencies. I'm on a lot of different lists, which means I get a lot of bulletins. Now, on the plus side, camera systems and video systems have improved so much in terms of their clarity that oftentimes if somebody's looking to identify an individual that was captured, there's a lot of success stories. We'll see the officer who sent out the bulletin will send out a bulletin or a message a half hour later saying, hey, thanks to Deputy Smith for identifying Jack Jones. Because it was clear and they had some experience with that individual. But there are so many bulletins that get sent out with this grainy, dark blob of nothing. And the headline is, anybody know this guy? And I'm like, is that really a guy? I'm not sure. What irritates me mostly is I get that it's the box to be checked. You go down, okay, a BOLO sent, email sent, yes, yes, yes. But, it really should be quality over quantity. If nothing else, get yourself a better picture. If you don't have it, then don't send it.
That was Albert Mesa.
Albert. Okay, that's right. Yeah,
I thought it was Albert Hendersonville, in Nevada. What about some writing tips for analysts?
Well, I told you before that I teach a class at San Diego State. Class is social control, has absolutely nothing to do with crime analysis, but I love it. And I love sort of working with the next generations of people who are coming into the criminal justice world. But, and you probably hear this from a lot of people who teach, that the quality of writing is really poor, generally speaking. One of the first things I tell these people, a lot of them who want to be cops and deputy sheriffs, is what do you think a typical deputy spends most of their 10, 12-hour shift doing? And some people go, driving a car, investigating, whatever. And I said, well, they do that, of course, but they do a lot of writing. They're writing a lot of reports. The detectives are writing a ton of reports. These homicide cases, as you probably know, can in the end reach hundreds, if not thousands of pages of material. So I tell them, learn the craft and art of writing. Get some help in doing that. There is no shame in saying that you're intimidated by writing, you're afraid to write. Then get some help. There are lots of classes available, free classes, moderately priced classes in community colleges that will help you with the craft of writing. I mean, I guess if I have a pet peeve, it's that, in this world of quick emails and quick text, we've kind of accepted misspellings and we've lost the ability to write in proper English. And I do sound like an old guy saying that, but because I'm sure I heard that from my teachers back in the day. But we're communicating, and I tell the people that sometimes a poorly written investigation report, we may miss something critical because you didn't write that up properly or in clear English.
All right, then what about recommendations for maybe some off-the-wall associations? I mean, obviously there's IALEA and IACA.
Right.
But
yes, well, it's not really off the wall so much as getting beyond sort of the strictly crime analysis world, which we live in with IACA and others. So I am a member of the California Homicide Investigators Association. I think some analysts are kind of reluctant to join what's typically seen as sworn associations because, well, that's for them. But, we all work together. And I have noticed certainly over the last 15, 16 years of my career, as the new generation of deputies have come in, really kind of embrace our role in the department as being part of the team and not some outsider that sort of sits away from things. So these conferences have a lot of good classes and sessions that can be extremely useful for homicide analysts. Many analysts, investigators have embraced genealogy, so you'll see sessions on that, as well as other things. And it's a way for you to commingle with the people that you work with anyway on a day-to-day basis in your own agency. I work with the detectives every day. Prior to coming to homicide, I worked for a time in criminal intelligence, and I was involved for a bit with the Cal Gang Association, Gang Investigators Association. Again, another one that's maybe begun to assist the world of sworn gang investigators, but there's lots of analysts out there who work in that world and can benefit from doing that. CalGangs has a conference in San Diego every year, and there are tons of analysts who go to that. So I know wherever you might be in the country or the world, you'll probably have your own regional association that you could join. And so I would find those associations that are relevant to whatever discipline you're working, especially if you work in an investigation unit. But I'm sure even those who work at stations who are traditional crime analysts, there are other associations that may help you kind of, again, embrace some ideas and things that are coming from other places.
Do you have any open source tools that you would recommend that are free?
That are free? Well, sure. Well, how about a few things that aren't free but are nominal cost? Okay. So I work in a lot of in the open source world now more than I used to in Homicide. We are completely reactive, right? We react to something that happens. So I've got to figure it out. And I use a lot of open source to do that. A couple of things that I've used, they help me in the genealogy world, but they've helped me with homicides too, interesting enough. I wouldn't have thought of it. One is newspapers.com, which is a compendium of newspapers going back to the 1800s, but there's a wealth of information there, especially when you're looking at cases that have a nexus outside of your jurisdiction, where you need to try to find some information on individuals, on people, associates that you may not be finding through traditional law enforcement database sources. And it's nominal. It's under $100 a year. And I use Ancestry.com, which can also be very inexpensive, not just for genealogy, but for research purposes for some of my cases. I do that routinely. It kind of surprises me because you think of Ancestry.com, you think of genealogy, and it is that. But it's helped me in the research of families, associates, and background that are important to cases that have nothing to do with genealogy stuff that I do. And then if I can make one other plug for an application that I use quite frequently, we are inundated with phones these days. Mm-hmm. We grab a phone from a suspect. Well, these phones are computers now, and they take a long time to download. They take a long time to analyze. But in the end, we're often very curious about where people are when calls are made or received. And I use a tool called GeoTime. Again, I use it all the time in terms of evaluating call detail record information. So that's my one sort of vendor plug for the conversation. They're a great company. I've worked with them for a number of years. They've been very helpful with some of our cases that have gone to trial.
All right. Thank you so much for all those recommendations. So our last segment to the show is Words to the World. And this is where you can promote any idea that you want to. Jeffrey, what are your words to the world?
I've thought a lot about this since I knew that I was going to be asked this. So I have two things. One of them is I would ask people to understand the power of humility. It's tough because, a lot of us in this world are type A's and hard charging and confident in our own abilities. But a dose of humility can go a long way in allowing us to understand other people and understand how other people work, and to understand and to actually be able to embrace some of the ways that they approach things that perhaps we hadn't considered. We don't do that if we're constantly inside our own world of how we do things. I think a companion element to that for me, and something I heard long ago and it kind of stuck with me, was that it's more powerful to be interested than to be interesting, if that makes any sense. And I think for me, why that resonates is that when you reach out to another and you establish a curiosity about them and their worlds and their work, then that fuels a relationship that you don't get when what you want to do is just communicate how amazing you are.
Well, very good. Well, I leave every guest with, you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Jeffrey. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you for joining us today on Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. We hope you not only enjoyed the show, but also learned something new. For more information on our guests and information relating to today's topic, please visit our website at leapodcast.com. Special thanks to the Rough and Tumble for our theme song. For more of their music, you can visit their website at theroughandtumble.com. Also thanks to Kyle McMullen for our show logo. For more of his design, please visit his website at moderntype.com. The show is hosted, recorded, and edited by Jason Elder and written by me, Mindy. You can contact us both via the LEA Podcast website. Please join us again next time as we interview another expert in this great field.